Good afternoon, Hazel. Thank you for joining us on the VP Life podcast. I must admit, it's great interviewing someone in the UK for a change. Don't get me wrong. I love every chance I get to speak to the people I do and that I've looked up for years. But when they're in the States and on the West Coast of that, it does get pretty tiring pretty quickly, especially when you're trying to be cognitively functional at 6 or 7 o'clock at night. Anyway, you've quite the story. And before we dive into everything sort of central nervous system and central nervous system related today, I'd love to hear all about it, how you ended up in the space you're in and how you're working with the people you are. We've time plenty, ish. So yeah, go into all the detail you like.
It's great to be the Brit, and thank you for having me. So I have a history of chronic illnesses. I had a lot of symptoms throughout many years, a couple of decades, starting off with chronic pain, which originated from a shoulder injury, actually, carrying a laptop, nothing exciting. And gradually this pain just spread and spread and spread. And I went to see so many different people and no one knew what to do with it. The pain just kept on spreading. I saw surgeons and physiotherapists and all sorts of people. And so I was in a lot of pain for a lot of my late 20s, early 30s. And then gradually it kind of got better. I actually was seeing a muscle activation technique guy in New York that somehow managed to do something with me. I'd also had some other underlying symptoms, which now I look back were also warning signs, like painful joints in my hands, noise sensitivity, constant like tonsillitis, ulcers, little things that you don't really put your finger on. And then I was back in the UK and I was going to get a surgery on my shoulder. Finally, I was going to be ready, rearing to go, ready to do exercise again. Had this surgery, which went perfectly well. It was just for an impingement. It wasn't like a big surgery. And a week later, my body just crashed to the floor. And I didn't know what on earth was going on. I literally couldn't move. The fatigue was immense. I developed extreme food sensitivities to the point where I didn't even know what I could eat anymore. It did actually end up running a pattern of kind of nuts and seafood, but there was lots of other random things. So there was a kind of fear created around food, not knowing how I was going to react. And it would come on immediately, and then I would be basically just extremely ill, like an immune response ill, not digestive. And then I was gradually getting better for over 3 years. So I had chronic fatigue syndrome, essentially. I didn't get formally diagnosed with it. We'll come on to diagnoses later in terms of why I am not a massive fan of them in general. But I knew it. I tried lots of different therapies, lots of different things. Some of them worked to a degree. I got myself gradually better. I still had limitations over what I could do, but I was a lot better. I could actually function as a human being. And then 2020, COVID came and I got COVID and I was no sicker than your average person. I mean, it wasn't pleasant, but it wasn't debilitating. It wasn't hospitalized or anything.
Didn't end up on a ventilator. Yeah.
Yeah. And then just as I thought I was on my road to recovery,
out of the weeds,
crashed down completely again. And it was just like going back in time, and the fear and panic that came over me from thinking, oh my goodness, what if this is another 3 years or whatever of this? And it wasn't just the fatigue as well. I actually developed really bad brain fog and really bad noise sensitivity and kind of was prone to overwhelm. So when my system became overwhelmed, essentially, which could be just doing anything, to be honest, like going into an environment it didn't like, or if I did too much of anything, which at the beginning, the window of tolerance was very small, I would just start coming out in floods of tears. I wasn't actually upset as such. It was just like the overwhelm of the nervous system. So the only benefit of getting sick twice was that I knew what to do. So I went back to all the things I was trying previously, gradually was getting better. But the symptoms were not shifting, especially the brain fog. And I was just struggling with this kind of plateau and trying to just get better. All the time that I had these symptoms for probably 6-7 years, I knew that there was something not quite right, but I couldn't put my finger on it. I knew that there must be, I wasn't sick before, so I always had the hope that I was going to get better. I just hadn't worked out what it was yet. And then I just came across the nervous system because it suddenly was in the public domain. People were suddenly talking about the nervous system and they weren't previously. And once I found out about the nervous system, it just was like, oh my goodness, this makes sense. So I then left my corporate job once I'd learned how to basically heal all my symptoms and work out how to do it. I then retrained and I left my corporate job and I set up my business to now help other people who are in similar situations. It's around awareness of the nervous system, awareness of what chronic illnesses really mean, what burnout of the nervous system really means, and helping people to get better essentially when there's no help available in our health system for conditions like this.
Yeah, no, that's an amazing story, and it just it speaks to your ability to push through, which I think, and this is something we'll come to later, where so many people just will not only push through but become self-reliant. I think so many people just fall victim to this idea that they should just rely on their doctor and the NHS or whatever the equivalent social welfare health system is that the listener is, whichever country they're in.
Yeah.
So no, that's remarkable, and the fact that you were able to sort of work that out is just a sort of a testament to, I suppose, your ability to push through. I would love to come back to some of that stuff in a second. From something you talked about earlier sort of really struck home though, and that was, it almost started to unfold sort of after the initial op. Do you think you had a negative reaction to the anesthesia or anything like that?
No, that's what I initially thought and what people may think. I think that what happened was my nervous system had been dysregulated for years. It was susceptible to some kind of crash, as we now know, as I now know, caused by chronic stress that's in the body that therefore weakens the functions within the body essentially. And I don't think it had anything to do with the anesthetic per se, apart from it was I guess the operation, the anesthetic essentially was maybe a trauma to the body. It was something that happened to the body that was out of the norm, and it just kind of threw it over, which is why when people find themselves in these situations with chronic illnesses, there's any number of different routes that people come in from to get there. COVID being one. I don't think that COVID in general is anything particular apart from it's a strong virus that throws systems off that are already weak. There are some anomalies with COVID in terms of the organ damage and stuff, which is kind of separate. But in terms of the post-viral fatigue element, glandular fever, other strong viruses, COVID, it's just a strong, it could be a car crash, it could be a significant life event like a divorce, like a death. It's something that if your system is, I don't know, weak's the wrong word, but like susceptible, it will push you over the edge. And that's why people come in from any number of different life stories and what's got them there. And it's also cumulative. So if you've got lots of small things happening, it could be just that final one that pushes you over. Most people are, when they do end up kind of crashing as such, they probably would look back and say, I was probably quite stressed at the time. Or, oh yeah, I think of some other things that happened in the past that maybe had contributed towards it. But it's generally like retrospectively, people can then attribute what's kind of going on in their life to then what's kind of happened to them physically.
Fair enough. Yeah, that makes complete sense. And I suppose that's really the perfect segue to talking about the nervous system, which is what I'd really like to to maybe dive into now. But before we get into, I suppose, the meat and the potatoes of today's conversation, which is essentially, I suppose, how you fix this. But at a high level, would you mind walking us through what the central nervous system is. Obviously, it's composed of two branches, and there's also something there called the vagus nerve. But I feel if we can just lay out that basic sort of biology and physiology, the rest of the conversation will just flow just a little bit more naturally. So, yeah, would you mind running us through how the nervous system works? Like, nice little 101, as it were.
Yeah, so we've got the central nervous system and the autonomic nervous system, and it's actually the autonomic nervous system which we pay most attention to when it comes to dysregulation and the chronic symptoms that people experience. And there's two, putting it simply, there's the two main branches. There's the sympathetic and there's the parasympathetic. And the sympathetic is what we know as the fight or flight. It what activates when we are in danger, if we're about to cross the road and there's a lorry coming, or if there's a bear in the woods, we would switch on and the symptoms would happen, like fast heart rate, get clammy palms, and we'd be in like fight or flight mode. There's also then the parasympathetic branch, which is our rest and digest, which is what we should be in most of the time. It's when we are at rest. It's when we're kind of, our heart rate is steady. It's when we're kind of calm. And that's kind of the two different states that we're in. So you've got the two different nervous system states, which is then the parasympathetic and the sympathetic. And what a regulated nervous system will do is it will switch between the two as and when it's needed. It will switch quickly into one and it will switch quickly out into the other. When you are dysregulated, when you've been in a state of chronic stress for a long time, that's when that shift doesn't happen and you can get stuck in fight or flight for too long. And then if you've been in that for too long, you can then end up going into shutdown mode, essentially. And the vagus nerve, which a lot of people are talking about these days, is so critical. It's like the longest nerve that we have going on in our body. And it determines whether to switch on the parasympathetic or the sympathetic branch. So it's super important that we are able to learn how to control as such our vagus nerve so that we are able to then effectively switch into the rest and digest or the fight or flight as we're needed. So that's kind of it in a nutshell.
Oh, that's perfect. Now, from what I understand, there are a few different branches of the vagus nerve. Is that correct? And sort of depending on which branch you're in, that's going to dictate maybe whether you're more sympathetic or parasympathetic. And now, there are various ways that you can activate the vagus nerve. Do you always want the vagus nerve activated, or is that sort of a bit of a misnomer? Do you want it to sort of, I suppose, vacillate a bit like everything else in life? I assume you don't want this vagus nerve to be on all the time, as it were.
No, it is around activating it when you need to and when you need to be able to get yourself into rest and digest more easily and more quickly. There's lots of exercises that you could do. They're called like vagal toning exercises, essentially, which is getting your vagus nerve to be more toned, effectively. Imagine it's like a muscle that you're using and it's going to become increasingly used. It will increasingly know how to be able to switch into the right state that you need. So if you were to do like any vagal toning exercises, I mean, there's little ones like just pulling your ear down, and there's ones where you can kind of follow your finger around with your eye and you're looking up to the right. There's a few different ones that you can do. You will, generally speaking, start yawning or sighing, and that demonstrates that you are switching into the parasympathetic, because it's therefore putting you into that rest and digest state. So if you are in a state of like anxiety and feeling fraught and feeling kind of on edge, if you could do these practices frequently, then your system will get used to kind of being in that rest and digest state more often, rather than just often being in fight or flight continuously. And that's what you want to learn to do, is shift into the rest and digest parasympathetic state as often as you can.
That's perfect. Thank you for breaking that all down. Now, I get to talk to a fair number of experts on this podcast, and the one question I tend to ask them, most of them actually, is why they feel people get sick. It's well, or maybe are unwell. It's largely a selfish question, I'll be honest. However, it does fascinate me, because so many of these experts, and they are experts, again, tend to actually get people well. You'll always sort of hear about how so and so, whoever has this program or has this methodology that really works for a lot of people. Now, not all the time, of course, because there is this idea, this biochemical individuality, and but it does pose an interesting notion, and that being that there are many sorts of ways to optimal health. Anyway, that will be a rabbit hole probably for another podcast, something we could spend all day discussing. But in your view, I suppose, why do we get, as a society, these chronic health conditions? I know you sort of touched on it a bit already, but maybe we can dive just a bit deeper into that.
It's such an interesting question. I don't think there's any categoric answer out there. I think there's lots of suggestions and ideas that it could be, and there isn't enough research at the moment happening in this place, because most research is funded by pharma companies, and a lot of this is not going to be gearing towards profit or a quick fix pill. So I don't think there's any hard and fast pure data on it. There's an element of genetics, of which there is research going on at the moment, but it seems that this is probably a smaller part to play than people used to think. A lot of it comes down to the way you were raised and your childhood experiences. Why is it that some people are more susceptible to stress? And why is it that others, people could have parallel jobs or parallel situations happening at work, for example? Why is it that some people get stressed and some people don't? There's quite a lot of research that's happened that does relate back to how you experienced things as a child. So if we think of ACE, which is the adverse childhood experiences, things that happened to you when you were young, like neglect or abuse. A lot of people, when they grow older, they have chronic illnesses, they have addictions, they have challenging lives. So that's fairly well known to a degree, especially around some of the addictions and behavioral issues. Maybe less so around chronic illnesses, although it's becoming more well known. So that's kind of a trauma element of too much that's happened to you too soon, too much that your nervous system was able to help with at a time, that's affected how your brain has developed. That means that you are more susceptible to stressful events, essentially. But there's also the trauma which is much less talked about, which is too little, too often. And that is around not having sufficient co-regulation when you are a child. And this can come through no malintent from the parents. It's part of the way that some of our generations have been brought up, which is not to, I guess, give emotional support. It's the fact that people don't really know how to do it. Some of our parents didn't have the tools that they needed to be able to give the emotional support that the child needed to enable their nervous system to become resilient. Because what the nervous system really needs, in a nutshell, is to feel safe. It needs to feel safe. And if it feels safe, then it will be regulated and everything will work as it should do. But if it feels unsafe, which could be that something bad happened, but it could be that it just didn't get enough care and attention, that seems to be a very common pattern for people who have chronic illnesses. There's a huge correlation between personality traits and chronic illnesses. Perfectionism, highly analytical, high achievers, very, very driven.
What's that like? I never...
Ringing any bells? And if you then think back to when you were a child and how these behaviors develop, of course, some of it is genetic to a degree, but most of these things are learned behaviors. And we learn our behaviors from how our parents were with us or how other adults around us were, what our schooling experiences were. And so we therefore start to drive and push ourselves. So if we're constantly trying to overachieve or push through and put that drive, we're creating that stress, ongoing stress in our body, which over time gradually just builds up. And that's why often you won't see the repercussions of it until much later in life, because you've had an accumulation of small stresses that are personality driven, and then you've got events that happen and they just kind of accumulate. And that seems to be a lot of reasons as to, from my experience and from the research I've seen, as to why certain people get sick and why certain people don't get sick.
Yeah, and thank you for that. That's a perfect answer. I would probably push back a little on the genetic piece. I think
I thought you
uh,
might.
I think everything is genetics. Oh, actually, I'm almost sure everything is genetics. At the end of the day, when somebody has a genetic predisposition to a certain nervous system stance, then, or not stance, what's the correct word? State. There we go. Then by default, that is going to upregulate all the disease processes that we've talked about, and we're going to talk about. I think if somebody is more predisposition to creating more of these catecholamines, these stress hormones that then trickle down and affect the immune system, and then sort of develop these Th17 responses and Th2 responses and all the big words that nobody cares about, then by default that is going to result in a certain individual, if they have a sort of a less than ideal, quote unquote, genetic makeup, being more susceptible to these sorts of issues to begin with. I mean, there are plenty of sort of anecdotal and case studies and reports where you have siblings in the same environment grow up. One goes on to thrive, and the other one doesn't. Now, if the environment's the same, yet the outcome is different, then there has to be something within that individual that is contributing to whether or not they succeed versus fail, putting it very black and white. And fundamentally, I think that comes down to genetic differences. Now, of course, that isn't all of it. And we discussed off air about this idea of terrain and germ theory as well. Germ theory suggests that germs are what we need to worry about, and we need to keep finding ways, I suppose, just to keep on killing them off. Whereas terrain theory sort of posits or argues that the idea that if the body is well balanced, then germs, I suppose, are a natural part of life, and the environment will be dealt with by the body without it causing distress. I mean, this speaks a lot to some of the stuff we've talked about off air about the toxic load on the body. Do you think having a high toxic load is going to contribute towards this sort of dysautonomia in general?
Yes, I think it's a huge contributory factor, because the stress that you're putting on the body, regardless of what aspect it is, whether it's to do with the toxic load, it's to do with the environment, it's to do with your makeup, all of those things, elements, are definitely going to be contributing towards your ability to withstand stressful events as you evolve, because they impact all the different functions of the body. You know, the liver function, to cut a bit, but they affect all the different functions of your body. So toxic load is, I think, hugely important here.
Yeah, no, I think ultimately what this all sort of speaks to, in my view, again, when you sort of peel away the layers of it, is mitochondrial dysfunction, the cell danger response, something I know we've talked about a fair amount. And so the way I view it, all of this sort of central nervous system dysfunction ultimately drives what is, I feel, is the central sort of unifying theory to what disease fundamentally is, and that is the so-called cell danger response. Now, I've harped on about this before, but essentially, the CDR, the cell danger response, is how our cells react when they are threatened. And in CDR, they will shift into a state of defense, and that can be triggered by any threat, whether it's an infection, a toxin, an injury. Speaking of injuries, potentially a shoulder injury even, or psychological stress. And instead of focusing on growth and repair, the cell then changes its priorities, essentially working towards survival. This then affects all the other systems in the body, especially the immune system, as there simply just isn't enough energy for the body to function properly. I'll not get too much into the weeds here, but I suppose at the heart of this sort of CDR model are mitochondria, normally, which, as we all know, work to act like sort of cellular power plants, making energy in the form of ATP. But when they enter into this sort of cell danger response, a cell arrest response, they deliberately become less efficient. It makes complete sense. If the body's under a threat, under attack, they're going to downregulate to conserve energy. It's sort of it's a nice sort of evolutionary way of looking at it. Now it's yeah, and they cut back on energy production essentially. What they also do is they actually release ATP extracellularly, so outside of the cell. It's called, strangely enough, extracellular ATP, and this fuel outside of the cell is actually then seen by the immune system as a danger signal, essentially. It's why I'm not a fan of people just taking NAD supplements willy-nilly, because the more NAD supplements you're taking, the more ATP you are producing. But potentially, if you're in an inflamed state, you are going to produce ATP that's then going to leak out of the cell or out of the mitochondria and create all of these issues. That's getting into electron leak and electron and proton gradients, and I should stop there before everybody turns off. I suppose, but yeah. Anyway, just to sort of run through the CDR stages quickly. You have three of them. It was put together by a Dr. Robert Navio, who's a hero of mine, obviously. And in CDR1, fundamentally what happens is that the cell senses a threat. Mitochondria leak these electrons, like I talked about earlier. They start to make more reactive oxygen species, which then create inflammation and oxidative stress, terms I'm sure we're all familiar with. And then there's a shift into how the body utilizes different types of energy sources. The mitochondria sort of shift into this state of glycolysis, where they're not utilizing fatty acids to produce fuel. They're using sugars. And that's a good and a bad thing, but fundamentally you are limiting the capacity of the mitochondria to produce enough energy. Now, in theory, what would happen is once the body has sort of seen a threat, it's sort of gone into CDR1, it will then sort of slowly transition into CDR2, which is thought to be the repair stage. And once the threat is controlled, I suppose the focus of the cell, is to shift into a sort of a rebuilding state. The mitochondria slowly start to work again, and they start to help produce various proteins and lipids or fats and what are called nucleotides, all of which are essentially cellular building blocks. And you then are able to start slowly rebuilding the cell. And then finally, you have this sort of transition into CDR3, which happens when the cell, I suppose, sort of just colloquially put, it sort of reintegrates into the network or the matrix. And that means sort of your metabolism comes back online, hormones start to be produced properly. And you are able to then effectively start utilizing the mitochondria as they are supposed to work. The challenge comes in when an individual gets stuck in these sort of CDR1 or CDR2 states. And the individual at question just is not able to function optimally because of this sort of impaired energy balance, these energy dynamics within the cell. Now, coming full circle, if you buy into sort of mitochondrial theory of disease, which evidently I do, then you'll agree that there are likely a few triggers here. Central nervous system dysfunction, dysautonomia, stress, in this context, obviously being a major driver. Now, there's a lot to obviously be said upstream of that in terms of that limbic system dysfunction that I know you're all too familiar with. But before we dive into that rabbit hole, I suppose I'd like to get maybe your perspective on this and your thoughts on whether or not this is ultimately sort of mitochondrial dysfunction that is this triggered by well, in this case, stress of some sort or another, or if, what do you think of that idea as a whole?
I think if we consider how impactful the nervous system is, or the autonomic nervous system is in terms of in if we think about how influential the nervous system is on determining our overall health, then it makes sense and stands to reason that actually it's our environment that's influencing our nervous system that's then creating this dysfunction that's happening within the cells. So my view is that, of course, there is dysfunction happening in the body, but if we can externally start to regulate our nervous system, then that will in turn start to increase the overall function that's happening in the body gradually, which is why I work with the nervous system, with the limbic system, influencing how they behave, which then in turn will then start to influence how the functions and cells are working and mitochondria is working in the body. That is how I perceive it, which is why sometimes especially when after I had COVID and I was reading all these millions of reports, getting obsessed into rabbit holes of looking for the magic fix to fix all of these different things that weren't working properly in the body that was causing all these issues, and why, generally speaking, that doesn't help people, is because you need to take it back up a level and go, okay, well, what's actually causing this more broadly? If you then start to actually work on your nervous system and your brain, then that will then in turn influence all of the different functions that are happening beneath that.
Fair enough. And then I suppose I've mentioned this term, and so have you. There's this idea of a lot of this being controlled by the limbic system. Now, we've talked about the sympathetic and the parasympathetic and the vagus nerve, but within the brain specifically, there's this area called the limbic system, the limbic region of the brain, which controls a lot of these processes. Could you maybe break down what the limbic system is, and then how dysregulation in that specific brain area seems to then drive these issues with the amygdala and this stress response that just seems to be ultimately creating so much of this dysfunction?
Yeah, so as you mentioned, we've got the limbic system. There's a couple of core components within that. We've got the amygdala, which is our stress alert, which then informs a hypothalamus, like how to also then respond, which then triggers the HPA axis, which then releases the stress hormones. So it's got that kind of layered response as to how the limbic system operates in a stressful environment, but it's getting its information from the nervous system. So that's why when I work with people, I work with them on how they are feeling and functioning in their body in relation to how they're breathing, how they're thinking, how they are standing, their posture, their emotions. All of these different aspects are informing the brain as to whether there's danger, essentially. So if our nervous system has symptoms or, I guess, behaviors which are indicating that there is danger around, like, for example, I could be sitting like this, I could be breathing really fast, I could be thinking, oh my God, the world is ending, oh my goodness. All these things, I think the brain's like, oh my goodness, there's something going wrong here. We need to switch on this stress, there's danger. So therefore, if you are presenting in a way that represents stress or danger, the brain therefore thinks there's danger, and therefore it triggers the response, and therefore your body is flooded with stress hormones. Now, if there is danger, and you did see you were about to have a car hurtling towards you, then there would be danger, and then you would need to have all of those mechanisms happening, and then it would be great to have cortisol and adrenaline to get you out the way and all of those things. But when it happens with people with chronic stress, they get themselves in this pattern that they don't even know that they're in until you actually create an awareness around it. And I can guarantee that anyone who has got chronic symptoms, chronic stress, they will be doing some of those things probably all of the time, even without knowing it. They'll be sitting like this, or they'll be hunched like that, or their breathing will be really shallow from their chest, or they'll just be thinking negative thoughts, or just being like thinking in an emotional like way that's not conducive to positivity, which is how much our thoughts can kind of empower like how we're thinking and things. So that's why it's so critical that we work on both the brain and the body together, because they both feed each other. And that's my view on how they work, and how you then can start to improve your symptoms is by working on how you are responding as a person, how you're being. And then over time, your brain will start to switch out of thinking that it needs to be on alert all the time. You'll stop being in fight or flight mode all the time. You'll just start to gradually relax. And as your nervous system just relaxes, as you relax, over time, suddenly your symptoms disappear, and you'll notice, most people notice that their symptoms are worse when they're stressed. And then people maybe go on holiday for a week, or they are off sunning themselves somewhere where they don't have to think about what they're doing. Oh, suddenly they feel so much better. And then they go back into the environment that made them sick in the first place, and suddenly the symptoms have come on. And if that isn't a really strong indicator that your environment and how you are being is influencing your health and your symptoms, then it's just there. It's clear to see. And everyone who I speak to, once they actually create the awareness, they start to notice it. It's just that when people have been sick for a long time, they start to focus in on their symptoms, and they almost become like buried and embroiled in like the misery of it, and counting what symptom is coming next. And oh, I can feel this and I can feel this, and what's this? Oh my goodness, what's going on? So there's this worry, there's this fear, there's this resentment, and
self-fulfilling prophecy.
Of that is just feeding your brain with, there's danger, there's fear, let's keep everyone in alert, let's keep you in fight or flight. So it's just this ongoing cycle that people don't know that they're in. But once you do, and you're open to it, and not just expecting some magical pill from somewhere, if you're open to it, suddenly people are like, oh my goodness. And that's when you can start to impact change on yourself by actually then taking action according to how you are operating as an individual.
So fundamentally what you're saying is win the lotto and go and live on a Spanish island.
Pretty much. Yeah. Although you'd have to be careful you don't take your misery brain with you. You'd have to actually embrace it, because what some people could do when they go and live on their Spanish island is still start complaining that it's too hot, that it's I don't know.
I might, at that point, I'd to be completely blunt, I might just say you deserve to be sick. Yeah.
Some people will find that, the glass half full or the rain perspective, some people will find problems with everything, and they're not willing to like make a change. They could go to the nicest place ever, but they're still like, looking for the worst case scenario everywhere. And they're the people who will
struggle the
probably
most.
not get better.
Yeah, no, I do think Carol Dweck's book there, Mindset, the sort of the growth versus the fixed mindset, is probably almost required reading when trying to work through something like this. You sort of got to flip that perspective on what's real, what isn't, and that you fundamentally can heal, even if it is difficult. I mean, this obviously isn't a walk in the park, but I think, well, as you've just alluded to, if you sort of maintain that mindset around everything constant being terrible all the time, it's just going to sort of reinforce that sort of negative feedback loop, and you're not going to get out of it. And I personally, and sort of observationally, I think that's the hardest part. I think trying to sort of convince yourself that it is going to be okay and that you can heal, and then be consistent in that thought process. That's the trick, I think, personally. And maybe it's just because I'm soft in the head, I don't know. But trying to maintain that Yeah, that sort of that thought process on a constantly, even when you are struggling, is really tricky.
It is the most difficult thing, and that's why healing takes a long time and why some people don't get better. And because it's not something that happens just overnight, you've got to have such perseverance to keep on going when you're not seeing those results immediately. And it is just the small things that you keep on doing that will eventually make that change. And the other reason it's so difficult is because you are essentially having to make changes within your personality, potentially, your way of doing things, the way you've been doing something for decades. That's difficult. And not everybody is able or willing to do it. But if you really want to get better and just think, well, what got me here is not helpful, I'm going to have to make a change if I actually want to get better. And once you start becoming observational about your thoughts, patterns, behaviors, and what's driving it and why you're like that, suddenly you can be like, okay, maybe that's not as helpful as I thought it was. But it's totally what you said about the mindset of growth versus fixed. If you've got a fixed mindset, like I speak to people all the time who've got this fixed mindset who won't get better because they're still just buried over there somewhere, and they're not changing and they're not open to it. But there's the people who ready, willing, trying, and they will get better if they can just keep it on consistent. But it's about having, it's helpful to have like accountability partners or people you're doing it with to keep you motivated, because it's difficult and it takes a long time, but you can get there with perseverance.
Yeah, and that's not something I know we'll be talking about later when we sort of touch on your program. Um, what do you think about vagal nerve stimulators? These sort of contraptions that sort of almost force, and maybe that is the dichotomy there, the body into a, is that the right word? I think so. Into a sort of parasympathetic state. Do you think that they are effective? Have you seen um, any case reports among your community to show that they are helpful, or are they kind of a bit hit and miss?
I think that would be the term I would use, hit and miss. I think they help some people, but they don't help other people. I tried two of them and they did not help me. That could just be me. But I do know some people who've tried them and they found it very relaxing. And the more that you can be relaxed, the better that's going to be for your overall health. I know some people have been overstimulated by them and it's actually caused their systems to crash if you're very sensitive. So, to be honest, I'm totally almost indifferent to them. If they are helpful to you, give it a go. But if they're not, then don't. It's that kind of one size does not fit all approach again. I mean, it would, again, it's that kind of magic fix, isn't it? A quick fix. If I just buy this contraption, I'll magically get better. And the other thing is that although it may help with switching you into your parasympathetic, which is always going to be helpful, it's only one component of it. It's not going to change your patterns and behaviors. So it could well be seen as more of a temporary fix, who knows? But you need to also be looking at the bigger picture. It feels like even if it does work for you, it's still one component of multiple components in terms of fully getting better.
Yeah, I like to view them as sort of aids. So I think they can be helpful in the same way that, yeah, maybe a sleep aid is effective at helping somebody to sleep. That doesn't mean that you should just take a sleeping pill to get to sleep every night. But if you are struggling to sleep and you have poor sleep habits, you can take the sleeping pill to support the sleep while you are improving the habits. And I think the same thing is true of these vagal nerve stimulators. I think that they can get the body into a parasympathetic state, which then helps the individual, maybe, hopefully, feel a little better. And in that, during that window of opportunity, I think it provides somebody with the ability to then sort of reinforce the baseline behaviors that need to be there in order to sort of maintain it without the device, and then also to sort of heal independently of it.
I think that's a good analogy. Yeah.
So yeah, that's the way I like to view them anyway. Hazel, I'd like to close up this section of the convo, but before we get there, what do you think about testing? Again, something we've talked a fair amount. Now, on the functional medicine space, it's kind of blown up, and wherever you go, somebody is testing something, whether it's the gut, your hormone levels, heavy metals, whatever. And truthfully, I think it can be useful in the right context, when the order of operations is maybe looked at a bit more closely. But I do think that just testing for the sake of testing is oftentimes not helpful. I don't think I'm going to get any endorsement from Genova Diagnostics for that statement. However, what do you think about testing, especially in this sort of functional medicine space and for people who are going through these complex health issues? Do you think it's effective or not really?
Yes and no. Sometimes it will just provide you with a lot of information, and which is overwhelming. The question is, does the practitioner who you're working with know how to resolve those issues? If, for example, there are heavy metals in your body and there's a way to dispel them, then detoxification, for example, that's probably going to be helpful for somebody. But a lot of the time you get all of these results, there's really not an obvious answer for them. To be quite frank, if we go back to, again, the functions of the body, and we talk about the mitochondria, it will come back down to your nervous system and your brain. So the reason that a lot of these tests might show that you've got malfunctions going on is because of that. So if you work on the bigger picture, you'll find that these functions gradually start to improve. I went down the functional medical route. When I was sick with COVID, I was put on all these different supplements, and I was, given all these different tests, SIBO, all these different things. But essentially, I'm not sure that it got me anywhere, because essentially what I needed to do was learn about the nervous system, because that was the crux of it. So you can spend thousands on different tests. I think it depends what test you're getting, who you're working with, and can they help you to do that. I mean, I know you mentioned specifically functional medicine, but for me, if we go to our GP and the standardized testing that's done, that's where I think people can fall into a huge well of going nowhere, because doctors will send you for all of these different tests because they don't really have anything else to do. And then they'll just generally come back that you're totally fine. And so then the patient is then just left with they had hope and now they've got no hope. So then they'll be sent for more tests and more scans. And people can just get in this cycle of wanting more and more and more tests, because they're like, but what if I find this? And what if it shows this? Looking for that magical little cure again, that magical little thing that will suddenly explain everything. So I think that whichever route you're going down with testing, you just have to be really careful that you just don't go down a rabbit hole when there's no solution, because unless there's a solution for the test result that you're getting, it's not really adding a lot of value. And it also can just create more worry. It can keep you more stuck and keep you in fear. Like, it's just not particularly helpful.
Yeah. I might push back on that slightly. I think testing can be effective, taking everything into account that you said, working with a practitioner who has an idea of what they're doing. I think if you just go to your GP, especially when it's on the NHS, for example, not to sort of throw them under the bus, but they sort of work off this sort of model that's given to them. So they work off guidance. And if somebody presents with a certain set of symptoms, they are then told which tests that they can run for that individual. A classic example being a thyroid test. If you're lucky, you'll get a TSH and a T4. For most people, that's not enough. You need a TSH, a total T4, a total T3, etc. And even then, that just shows that there's a problem with thyroid physiology, with thyroid function. It doesn't highlight why the thyroid is wrong. So that indicates to me, well, that suggests to me that it's not the testing that's the problem. It's the sort of the whole sort of system around the testing that's at fault. And then you go down the root cause rabbit hole, which is fundamentally what functional medicine is and is supposed to be about. And that should work. The problem there being, in my opinion, is that functional medicine isn't necessarily yet standardized.
No.
So instead of having an idea of what should be tested and when, every practitioner has their own sort of flavor of functional medicine, and
Yeah.
consequently, you will go to somebody for potentially for whatever. And most people end up at a functional medicine physician 90% of the time because there's some sort of overlying fatigue.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, so consequently, you will go to a practitioner, and they'll test the gut or heavy metals or hormones, and it's very, very tricky to then sort of start putting this together without spending a huge amount of money,
Yeah.
and then B, being able to actually identify which one of these many tests is fundamentally highlighting the actual problem.
Yes.
Because you have a gut issue, you have a heavy metals issue, but for most people, a gut issue could be the result of the heavy metals, because something like a candida infection can feed off heavy metals. Or
Yeah.
consequently, if you have high iron, you can also have a candida overgrowth because candida feeds off excess iron. So is that now
Mm.
a gut issue? Is that an issue with iron metabolism? Is that an issue with not enough copper? Okay, so let's run, I'm going on a rant here, a metabolomics profile to sort of look at all our nutrients. But then following on from that, oh, wait a minute, we've got issues with B9 and B2. So it has to be a genetic issue, which it probably is, but that's another kettle of fish. So I think testing is great, and I think fundamentally that it works, but you have to have a very savvy practitioner. And I think in this whole
Yes,
field,
exactly.
we need more standardization, which is why I'm personally sort of a proponent of this sort of terrain theory as a starting point, and the nervous system regulation work that you do as a starting point, because it clears the baseline by default. And when you have a body that is as free from toxins and as free from stress and is as nourished as it can be, then what you can do is you can start layering testing to potentially find out what's still missing. But sort of starting with this, well, let's just test everything, let's throw the kitchen sink at it, and then start sort of just pulling strings, hoping that one of them will help an individual feel better, help them sort of get symptom relief. I think that is, it's just there's no reason, rhyme, or logic to it, and I think that's where people really do get stuck and caught up, and then they sort of feed into this sort of cycle of, oh, the test says, ergo I am, and anyway,
And I think
um,
that what you've explained is why I don't always advocate going down the testing route for exactly all those reasons. Like if you have an amazing practitioner and you've got loads of money and you can run all the tests you need and you kind of know how to resolve from those different tests, then awesome. But that's such a small percentage of getting all those pieces in the puzzle. For the vast majority of people, it's just not as effective. Yeah, and as you say, it's unregulated. It's all private. It's just a minefield for people to kind of get embroiled in, and you can just, as you say, get all these different results and then still not really know what to do about it. So theoretically great, but in practice it can be challenging.
yeah, I think so. And it's great in that it paints, if you can do it, it paints this beautiful picture. But then you, again, at the risk of sounding like a cracked record, you've got to have someone who can interpret this data. And I think that's, yeah. And when you have labs that are private and they aren't sort of taught in a medical curriculum, it gets complicated. Anyway, um, I'm going to give my soapbox now because I would like to get back to the nervous system. Anyway, we've I suppose, gone round in circles, which is likely my fault. But could you share your, I suppose, overarching philosophy with us with regards to why a mindset first approach is so vital for helping people to start feeling better? I know we've sort of already covered this, but I'd like it if we could maybe dig a little deeper into that. I mean, we've discussed why the biology behind the mindset, but I think if we could maybe talk a bit more about it from this sort of glass half full approach, that would be helpful for people. And then I'd love to jump into your process a little later, but if we could just start there, I think that would be great.
So, mindset is incredibly important for healing, recovery, because it enables you to think forward and not be stuck in the past. You need to believe that you can get better because you're feeding your brain with that information that you can get better instead of the kind of the negative cycle that you can't. So fundamentally, you need to have the mindset element. You also then can play into like the visualization aspect of it, of visualizing how your future can be and how well you can be. So thinking in a positive mindset in terms of how your future life could look like, because the brain doesn't really know the difference between reality and visualization. So the more that you can feed it with that information, the more it's going to receive that, and then the neuroplasticity element will happen. Having said that, getting well is not just about positive thinking. If it was just that simple, then we'd all be fine. Well, not everybody, because some people will never be able to get in that zone, but it's not just about positive thinking. If I go back 10 years, I read all these books on the mind-body connection, which was essentially, as I read it, was think yourself better. And if you're not getting better, then it's your fault because you're not thinking positively enough. And it's just not that simple. There is the bit I mentioned about mindset, having that growth mindset, believing you get better. It's super important. But neuroplasticity, retraining the neural pathways in your brain, retraining how your nervous system responds to stress, they are fundamental components to getting well. You need all of those things. And before I work with anybody, I have to know that they will learn to be able to think that they can get well. And I said that in that kind of convoluted way because sometimes when I speak to people and they're quite sick, they're struggling to be able to get themselves in that mindset, but they are open to it. So you need to be open to the possibility that you can definitely get well. And as you progress, that will be reinforced because you'll be like, I can feel I'm getting a bit better. Okay, I now have hope. I know I can get well. So you have to be open to the possibility that you can get well. And if you're not open to it and you're stuck in that rut and you're not going to be willing to move forward, I don't work with those people because they're just not going to benefit from the nervous system mindset kind of work, essentially.
Hazel, I couldn't agree more. Again, I think mindset is completely critical and it's important and it's required. How do you work with people who have developed an identity around their disease, their disorder? I know we were talking about this again previously, where we sort of noted that people will often create literal identities around this disease they have. Their Instagram profiles, their Facebook profiles will be littered with fibro warrior or whatever
Yeah.
is sort of whatever struggle they're going through. Do you actually work with these sorts of people at all? Or how do you sort of take someone who has sort of created this sickness identity and then I suppose get them back into a state of being of not identifying with their
Yeah.
illness?
I haven't worked with anybody who's actually got it put all over their Facebook profile.
Hmm.
I've worked with people who are quite consumed with their illness, and that's quite common and quite natural to be like that. I don't know from my experience of interacting with people who do have the labels, whether they're the people who would be open to recovery. It feels like they've almost become ingrained in this identity. I'm not saying that they enjoy being there, but there's something about being stuck there that makes them feel like they want to be stuck there. Maybe there's an element of safety around it. I imagine they must have probably some kind of fixed mindset to actually be okay with putting that label on, making sure everybody knows that they've got that label. And from experience, they haven't been super open to the idea that you can get well. I think that people who've been ill for quite a long time, and I'm going to say in the UK, but I think it's the same in the US as well in terms of the associations that envelop around these conditions. So we're talking about the ME Association, Long COVID Association, the Fibromyalgia Association. I think they've got a lot to answer for, to be honest, because their websites will tell you that there's no cure and there's no solution and there's no nothing. So if you're the type of person who believes the doctors, because they have professors, they have all these experts who kind of support these associations, and they tell you that. So if you're the type of person who believes that, and believes the doctor's always right, and believes that there's no way of getting better, then that's what you will always believe if you're not willing to question it. And actually, if I am getting trolled on anything that I put out there on long COVID or fibromyalgia, the abuse I get is quite insane. That I'm selling snake oil and actually conning people, because people will tell me it's fundamentally impossible to get better from fibromyalgia. It's fundamentally impossible to get better from CFS because this doctor told me, or I read it over here, or this person, or they use themselves as an example. I know it's impossible to get better because I haven't got better. And it's that mentality that it's not that I wouldn't work with them. I wouldn't work with them. They wouldn't work with me because they think I'm talking absolute nonsense. But I struggle with the mindset of people who are not open to it, because I was always believed that there was a route to get better. Always. I just hadn't found it yet. And to be of the mindset where you would rather have all this pain, have all this fatigue, have this terrible, terrible life that they keep telling you about, their terrible, terrible life, you still would rather stick there waiting for something magical to happen, the ME Association to suddenly turn around and go, sorry, we got it all wrong. Yes, you can get better. If they ever did turn around and did that, there would be a huge shift in people being able to get better. But until that happens, you're going to keep having these warriors and keep having these people whose identities are consumed by chronic illness. Kind of a comfort blanket in some ways, I think. But it's not something I personally can relate to.
Yeah, no, I think you touched on a lot of points there, and I think for what it's worth, fundamentally that people get wrapped up in these ideologies and their belief systems because, as you said, they're safe. And I think there's also community there. There are other people who share these same belief systems. And as a result of that, if you can then identify as being part of this community, you now have other people in your life to maybe
Yeah, you're
distract you
totally right. Yeah,
from
I
the
missed out that
misery.
bit. The
Yeah.
community element is super important, but it's that safety net, isn't it?
Yeah, and it just feeds into another ideology. I mean, people will get the dietary tribes that sort of develop are the same way, aren't they? People will sort of literally tear you apart if you dare sort of question their carnivore or vegan diet, and
Yeah.
irrespective of whether it's helping that person or not, and it just comes down to these tribal belief patterns that people pick up. And again, I don't think it's got anything to do with the diet. It's got to do with a belief system, that makes them feel safe, that makes them again feel part of this community. And that's, I think, incredibly powerful. And nobody fundamentally wants to be alone. And when you are not well, you are, for the most part, alone. And that is an incredibly unpleasant place to be. So and I think I think that's maybe the silver lining of COVID, and in that it's brought a lot more awareness to these sorts of issues, broadly speaking. I mean, fundamentally, what COVID and long COVID is sort of all things sort of removed in terms of whether it's reactivated EBV or whatever. It's essentially this sort of ME/CFS stuff, and I think that. This awareness that's now growing as a result of that is definitely going to do the whole community a lot of good. Now, that has to sort of evolve past this, again, fixed mindset of the ME Association says it's not curable unless someone happens to develop a drug that is going to sort of solve that problem. But yeah, no, I think fundamentally that's the issue that most people have, is just this sort of this isolation and this need for community around it. And I'm being verbose again, so I'm going to stop talking. But
your world becomes a lot smaller, and you're basically living through the internet. And we know that the internet can be a very negative and dangerous place. And actually, my biggest bugbear with people who are chronically ill. So, if somebody who's had CFS or ME and they get better, there will be a group of people who say you didn't have it in the first place because it's not possible to get back better from it. So what I have and what you had are not the same thing. That, like, dismissive, accusatory behavior, I find difficult to get my head around, putting down other people's experiences because they were able to actually get themselves better, dismissing somebody else's experiences.
it's just disappointment, isn't it? It's almost it's a type of envy. You don't
Yeah.
want to acknowledge that somebody else has been able to achieve what you've not been able to achieve
Yeah.
yourself. And I think that it's very hard to celebrate somebody else's win when you are still sort of just trying to get past the start line. So I think that just comes down to a
The
certain level of
mindset again, it's the fixed mindset, because you could be of the view, how did you get better? You managed to get better. Please help me. How did you do it? You could
yeah.
be of that, or you could be like, well, you weren't sick in the
That's a
first
human
place.
condition, though, isn't it? It's
Mm.
hard to not feel that resentment, and and if you feel resentment by default, it's very hard to then actually ask someone how they achieve something. It's much easier just to sort of throw them
Yeah. Oh yeah,
their
absolutely.
anecdotal success under the bus and say, well, you didn't have it as bad as me, you
Yeah, yeah,
didn't
yeah.
have it at all,
There's a little
whatever.
competition going on with who's
Yeah.
the worst, who's got the worst symptoms, who's had it the longest. And when I was sick, and I was super sick, you can say I wasn't sick because I got better, but I was really sick when I had CFS and long COVID. But I never was of that mindset of hatred towards people who are getting better or believing that they weren't sick. I was always just like, how did you get better and how can I get better? I just would never have, gone down that route. And it's, again, just different mindsets of people.
Yeah, I'm afraid I don't have a retort or a comeback or any for that one. I don't know how anyone can sort of alter that perception, I suppose is the best word, on appreciating somebody else's success and then being willing to learn from them. I don't know what fundamentally drives that sort of behavior in somebody. I'm trying to think, which is a bad idea, but anyway. Okay, we've been going around in this circle for a while. So, Hazel, what about what actually works? Now, for the listeners who are still here, I assume they are probably after a few tidbits of information that you have found and developed that help people to sort of move the needle. Now, I'm not expecting you to give away your IP. Well, maybe not all of it. But yeah, would you be open to sharing, sort of just broadly speaking, of course, what you found is effective for people at helping them to maybe get out of the worst of it?
Yeah, so it's a combination of things. It's around different techniques to regulate your nervous system. It's around different techniques to rewire your brain, and then it's also looking into what's causing it in the first place, what patterns and behaviors are kind of getting getting you there. What I generally start people off with is actually increasing their capacity to be able to heal. So it is actually a lot around doing visualization, meditations, and mindset work so that you're actually prepared and ready to be able to start regulating your nervous system. Because if you are sick, you can get overwhelmed quite quickly. Not so much psychologically overwhelmed, but your nervous system can become overwhelmed. But one of the key techniques that I then introduce is what I call the TED method. And it relates to what I was talking about earlier in terms of how your nervous system is informing your brain, essentially. So it's thoughts, emotions, breathing, and body. So every 15 minutes, so I would say 15 minutes if you are dysregulated, and you can put a timer on, and then you can reduce it as you become weller. Every 15 minutes, do a scan of your body and just be like, okay, what are my thoughts like? Are they neutral? Are they positive? Are they negative? What are my emotions like? Are they strained? Are they happy? Are they sad? Are they angry? What's my breathing like? Is it sharp, shallow, breathing from the chest, slow? And what is my body like? Am I tensed? Am I relaxed? How am I sitting? What's my positioning? And then you can basically reset all of those things and just be like, okay, so any negative thoughts are gone. I'm going to be thinking neutrally or whatever. Just if you're in a kind of some kind of dark hole or going down a rabbit hole, it can be quite easy for people to get in sort of spirals, ruminations. Switch off any of those ruminations, relax all of your muscles, your jaw, your tongue, really kind of do that body scan. You could be holding on to muscles that you're not even aware that you're holding on to. And then you can get up and just shake for like a minute.
Yoga nidra sort of stuff.
Yeah, and just and that will release any kind of the, I guess, pent up energy that's inside your body. And if you do that on a regular basis, you will start to see some shifts, because what you're doing is that if you were in a state of fight or flight with those things kind of pent up, you're then switching yourself into then the rest and digest state, and then you're kind of resetting, essentially. Use the word resetting, but you're basically resetting the state that your nervous system was in. And over time, once your system becomes normalized into it's actually relaxing, then that's when you can start to see those shifts happening in terms of your symptoms. But it's about that awareness. And people are always amazed by how much they were kind of holding in a kind of day-to-day that they didn't even realize that they were doing. So that for me is one of the really thing that people can take away and just do really regularly, and just see what their natural state is on a day-to-day basis.
Fair enough. And I suppose you're talking to chemists. What are there any sort of supplements that you do like? Are there any sort of dietary interventions that you find are effective at helping people to sort of support these the behavioral aspect of what it is that you do, or do you sort of generally steer clear of that sort of thing?
I generally steer clear of anything supplement related, because I would be giving advice anecdotally or based on things that I've read or experiences I've had. And supplements, generally, people need different things for different reasons. Having said that, I would always say magnesium is a great supplement to be taking, but I don't really think it's in my wheelhouse to be talking about supplements. Diet is super important. Again, not going into different types of diets, but making sure you're having a balanced diet with a good amount of protein and enough vegetables and fruit. Basically steering away from processed food as much as possible, because it's going to be not doing your body any good whatsoever.
Just
so
having
a healthy diet is very important. Having good sleep. A lot of people I work with, however, do not have good sleep, and that's because their nervous system is dysregulated. So as part of doing the work that I do with people, over time their sleep improves. But it's about making sure you've got a routine. You're going to bed at the same time, you're getting up at the same time, and trying to put those practices in place. So it is about your lifestyle. making sure that you've got the right nutrients in your body, either through supplements or through food, getting enough sleep, getting enough rest. Don't be up at the crack of dawn, going on a run, rushing to work, never taking a break, out in the evening drinking, going to a HIIT class, doing the same thing over and over again. You're going to burn out. So it's about being sensible and taking breaks and just checking in on how your body is feeling. Most of us are stuck in our heads. Most people who work in the corporate environment are so used to being analytical and just thinking with their heads. They have no idea what's going on in their body. They don't know how to feel anymore. They don't know what their body is feeling. They don't pick up on any sensations. They either can't feel it, they don't know it, they ignore it, brush it under the carpet.
Yeah.
It's really starting to take notice, take accountability, take responsibility for your own health. You can't rely on other people. And I think that's the difference between nervous system work and other types of work, is people are so used to outsourcing their health. I'll go see a therapist, I'll go see an acupuncturist, I'll go and get a medication, I'll go have a massage, I'll go somewhere for an hour and someone will make me better. And that's not going to cut it if you have got yourself into a state of chronic illness. You've got to work on yourself from within. There's no quick fixes. That's the only way that you can really start to make inroads in your health, really.
Yeah. One argue there might be, and that's psychedelics. Now, I know you have thoughts and opinions on these. There's a lot of research, obviously, within the MAPS community, run by Rick Doblin. Actually, I saw you some research there. I think I better send it to you at some point. Sorry about that. About utilizing these so-called psychedelic compounds to help with this ego dissolution side of things, to help the reticular activating system, the part of that brain that sort of what's the best word, tends to mulch over the same thoughts continuously, to disconnect. Now, essentially, in this research, what happens is you take a psychedelic, whether it's MDMA, mescaline. Most of them are serotogenic compounds, normally sort of derived from psilocybin or the aforementioned other drugs. And there is some data, especially within the PTSD community, which is, as you know, sort of central nervous system dysfunction, autonomic dysregulation 101, where these compounds have been shown to be very effective at helping to modulate these thinking patterns. And then subsequently downstream of that, there are a whole bunch of immunological and inflammatory improvements fundamentally. Now, I don't suppose you have a huge amount of personal experience with psychedelics, but what do you think of this body of research in general? Do you think that there's something there, or is it a bit sort of asking for trouble, do you think?
I think it's awesome, to be honest. I know that there's been a lot of success in the trials that have been done in relation to addictions and to PTSD. And I know there's some trials now in relation to long COVID. I think anything that can be helpful should be pursued and funded and researched more. It takes us away from the pharmaceutical reliance. And with the psychedelics, it can actually, rewire the brain, which is got itself into a bit of a dysregulation as such. So anything that can help, I'm fully supportive of. It's a shame that it is illegal in the UK. Many countries, some states in America, I think, have been opening up. But I think there is some open for funding in these countries. So I'm fully supportive of it. The only thing I would say is with some of the stronger psychedelics, like ayahuasca, you have to be, I think, a little bit cautious going in if you are extremely traumatized. It can obviously be helpful with trauma, and some people have found huge benefits from it, but some people can get re-traumatized and be affected afterwards. So I think it's just going in with a cautious mind, an open mind, and just looking after yourself. But yeah, bigger supporter of it.
Fair enough. Yeah. I think intention is everything. And these compounds have to be utilized in a safe manner. It's not a case of just going to Wales, finding a sheep farm and picking a bunch of mushrooms and then lying there and sort of wondering why it's all gone wrong afterwards. You have to have an intention. You have to have the support there to help you through this process. And I think that psychedelic assisted psychotherapy really is a breakthrough for a lot of people. But yeah, as you said, it's very fringe. I know there is a lot more research and in the synthetic psychedelics, your dissociative compounds like ketamine. For a lot of people, that seems to be pretty hit and miss, though. The ones that do seem to be effective are your plant alkaloids, your mescaline, your psilocybin. But those are a lot of strings attached, as you've alluded to, just regarding the legalities and the laws. But hopefully, the research that people like Rick Doblin doing at the MAPS Institute will start to sort of expedite some of that research and bring it into clinical practice. But yeah, this has been amazing, Hazel. Thank you for your time. Before I let you go, though, would you mind running through a few rapid fire questions for us?
Of course.
Cool. Your personal favorite daily nervous system regulating practice?
I would say either shaking, depending on whether I'm trying to release some pent up energy, or otherwise, if you feel like you need a little bit of a hug and something to actually reassure your nervous system, you can just do this kind of gentle rocking. It mimics like when you were a baby, essentially, when you're being rocked. It gives your nervous system that kind of safety and security. So a bit of rocking or a bit of shaking.
Perfect. Thoughts on, I think, with David Vassili's work with trauma release exercises, TRE?
What's my thoughts on TRE?
Mm-hmm.
I think that it's good. I mean, I have a result of TRE, I guess, through doing somatic exercises in general. They do create a release. So I think that it's super helpful. I don't go through I think with TRE, there's a specific kind of process you're supposed to follow, protocol to get to that particular shaking. I have tried it in the past. That was before I even knew about somatics and release and all those kind of things. So I think that shaking itself is really good. Whether you need to do that TRE protocol, I would question, because you can also get fascia and trauma release from other different types of somatic exercises as well.
Perfect. One myth about chronic fatigue you would like to dispel?
I think I might have laboured that already. You can actually get better. The fact that you've got it for life, there's no cure, you're there forever, you're going to have to count spoons for the rest of your life. Just have the mindset you can get better.
Perfect. And then finally, one book or resource that you really love that you think anyone in this space should read?
I would say The Body Keeps the Score. I put Gabor Mate, but I don't think he wrote it. I've suddenly had a brain. I've got so many authors in my mind. What's his name?
Not a clue. I'll tell you now. Keeps the Score. Bessel van der
Kolk. I would say The Body Keeps the Score by Bessel van der Kolk. It's revolutionary in terms of how it informs people about what's happening in your body and how it remembers what's going on. If you're new to mind body or new to this kind of way of thinking around the nervous system and healing yourself, it's a super good one to start with.
Yeah, I think the one I really like as well is Zebras Don't Get Ulcers.
Yeah.
That's a great one as well.
There's quite a few books out there which are helpful in terms of explaining some of these concepts.
Yeah, there really are. There are a bunch of them. Hazel, again, you've been a star, absolute treasure. I know you have a program that walks people through this from beginning to end. Would you like to just run us through it quickly, and then where people can find you, the best place that they can connect, and all that good stuff?
Yeah, sure. It's called the Neuro Resilience Program. It's 12 modules. It's 6 months, so there's no rush and you're kind of supported through it. It's a group coaching program, and it's really helps people who have got themselves stuck into this kind of chronic illness world or in burnout, a sense of burnout. And it's a supportive program to help you through with an approach on somatics, brain retraining, and then the root cause element as well. You can find me at my website, which is rebalancewithhazel.com. The program details are on there. And for anybody watching, you can have a 10% discount, which with a code I'm going to share. I also do a 1 hour nervous system reset hour if that's something that you kind of feel like you could just do with an hour of bringing yourself back into your body and learning some techniques to kind of get you on with the day. Then I offer 10% off that as well.
Perfect. We'll link to all that in the show notes along with the code and your all your social platforms as well.
Amazing.
Hazel, thank you so much for your time. We'll have to do this again soon.
Thank you for having me, Rob.